Our study of personalities and how we can learn more about our own personality, but others' personalities as well. And of course, all in an effort to increase unity and harmony in the Lord's church and better accomplish the work of the Lord. There again is the book. We've shown that every time. I know, I don't know, there may be one or two copies left. I think Miss Joyce is teaching tonight. She'll know. But I can point you in the right direction if you want to get one anyways and do some study on that. I don't know about everybody else, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the study. I've really learned a lot from it. In fact, an interesting thing, if you recall, we've talked about the different personalities and some of the traits that go with a strong choleric, a strong melancholy, and so on. Hayner, the fellow I stay with, he's starting the congregation in Moravia, which is a district of San Jose, Costa Rica. Hayner, Monte Alto is his name, and one night we dropped off Richard, the other translator. We dropped off Dave and Nikki at their hotel, and we're driving home, and we were talking, and he really just kind of out of the blue, we'd been talking about something, but he just kind of mentions to me, he says, "I like hard things." And I said, "Okay," and he said, I like to do something that's difficult. He said, when I was when I was very young, I obeyed the gospel and became a Christian. He did not have a family that brought him up in the Lord. In fact, for a time at least, it was quite the opposite. His mother has since obeyed the gospel. Hopefully his dad will at some point. But he says, I obeyed the gospel at a very young age, and I didn't have mom taking me to services. I traveled a pretty good distance for a 12, 13-year-old boy to travel. But I did that. He said, when I was barely 18, I decided, never been out of my country, I'm going to preacher training school. I'm going to Dallas, Fort Worth area to enroll in the Brown Trail School of Preaching. I didn't speak a word of English. I think he told me he could say food and bathroom in English, and that was it. So he came, and he learned to speak English, and now he's bilingual and does a lot of translating. And I've not worked with a ton of translators, but of the ones I've worked with, probably one of, if not the best. And then he said there was the work that he's doing now in Moravia. He said, coming to a place, starting a church from zero, I mean, that's that's not easy. But he says, I don't know, it's just something about when I'm doing something that's really difficult, I feel alive. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, "You're a choleric." And he said, "What?" And so I kind of explained it to him. And Nikki and Dave, I was telling them about the study that we've been doing, and they got a copy of the book, and they've studied it. They've taken the personality test. And so Nikki, one day we were sitting around getting ready to go out and do some door knocking and studies, and Nikki said, "All right, we got to assess you, Hayner." And so we had him take the test or the assessment, whatever you want to call it. And sure enough, he was very, very strong choleric. And of course, I figured that out. But I thought, boy, when you, one of the things, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself as far as the report I'll give on the trip, but one of the things that I've discovered after this trip is that in any culture, in any country, big city work is a lot different. It's a lot more difficult. People don't generally plan campaigns in a big city. There are some other reasons for that, safety issues sometimes and things like that. But a lot of times it's just because people are not typically as receptive. How many door knocking campaigns are there in downtown Atlanta? I haven't heard of one in years. And it's because it's just a lot more difficult. There are other things as well. There's a lot of businesses interspersed, but it's just different. It's difficult. And so it's a very easy situation for someone to get discouraged. So when Hayner was telling me that, I laughed and I said, well, I feel good going home and leaving a work like this in your hands, in the hands of someone who says literally, I feel alive when I'm doing something that is very challenging and difficult. And that's one of those characteristic traits of a strong choleric. You present them with a challenge. Some personalities go, I don't know, and the sanguine might get excited about it at first and then kind of go, well, that was exciting at first, but I'm just a little bored with that now. The new wears off. But man, you get a strong choleric, and they get a hold of that, and they don't turn loose until they've conquered it. So that kind of made me excited about the work that's going on there in San Jose, Costa Rica. I'm turning around behind me again. We started talking about getting along with difficult Christians last class. I keep wanting to say last week, so just bear with me if I say that. And I'm going to move quickly through this slide because we covered this, talking about, just wanted to bring this up to remind us that difficult sometimes just means hard to understand. People are difficult many times because they're not like me. People will be difficult to you sometimes because they're not like you. And what we've got to remember is that the world it would be an extremely boring place if everybody was just like me or just like you. But that sometimes causes difficulty. It's not always just a genuine disagreement. Sometimes it's just differences, and we need to understand that. We covered some of the difficulties that we often encounter with sanguines. Sometimes they can act like children. We love this when we're maybe in a down mood and we need cheering up, and the sanguines can do that. I mean, they sometimes can just, when you just feel like, the world's caving in, they can come along and cheer you up, but they find the shiny, the new in everything. But sometimes you get frustrated. They borrow things, they don't return them, they leave things all over the place, and some of the more sensitive temperaments, they can find them annoying, frustrating, because they're always trying to make something interesting and exciting. And sometimes even with some of my children, they'll get frustrated if school is not exciting or something like that. And sometimes I even say to them, which I'm pretty strong sanguine myself, but sometimes I'll even find myself saying, look, not everything in life is going to be shiny and exciting. Sometimes learning is not the most enjoyable thing. You just got to suck it up and do it. But sometimes they can rub people the wrong way, other personalities at least, when they're acting a little bit like children, at least as others might view that. Sometimes they talk faster than they think. They quite often talk faster than they think, if they think at all. and again, this is coming from somebody who's a sanguine, so don't take offense at that, because I'm aiming that gun right at me as much as anybody. Sometimes, as sanguines, the mouth engages before the brain does. That's just a fact, isn't it? And if you're a sanguine, if we're honest with ourselves, we have to say, yeah, that's the case sometimes. Sometimes you say something, you go, yeah, I probably would have been better off just to leave that unsaid. It might be something that's ugly. It might be something that's just out of place. Sometimes you hear about the guy who's going to laugh at a funeral. That's probably a sanguine, because they can't stand the seriousness. They can't stand the awkwardness, the silence. And I just feel like I got to say something, so I'll try to say something funny. And sometimes it's just inappropriate. and a melancholy especially, we talked about, will find this inexcusable many times, because a melancholy will never speak without thinking first. In fact, sometimes quite often melancholies overthink, and they've come out with every possible response. Melancholies are great chess players, of course, but they just, somebody who speaks without thinking is just, that's frustrating to a melancholy. And we looked at some of the other things here, undisciplined, repetitious, and so on. We covered those. We began talking about the cholerics, some of the things that make a choleric difficult. They hurt others' feelings, not intentionally, but sometimes they can hurt others' feelings because they're so goal-oriented. They're focusing on that obstacle they've got to overcome, and on that victory that they're trying to achieve. And sometimes there are things in the way, and they're going to run over those things. But you know what else sometimes gets in the way? People. And it's not okay just to run over people, right? But sometimes without intentionally doing that, they do that. So they may hurt others' feelings. They don't mean to come across cold or callous. Many times they're saying what they're thinking at the time. And they can have that same problem of not always thinking through. Sometimes it's on their mind, and they say it. We talked about the example of a group meeting, and maybe somebody comes up with the idea of a menu. Well, we're going to do a Mexican food themed BK meeting, and the choleric may just say what's on his mind. Well, I don't really care for that kind of food. Now somebody's upset, and especially maybe a melancholy that's detailed out in the menu and got every little thing planned, and maybe there's a sanguine in the group who says, oh, that'd be cool. We could have like a piñata or something like that, and the choleric just is on his mind. So that's kind of dumb. It's just a BK meeting. What's the big deal? Well, now the sanguine, what a Debbie Downer. You always got to rain on the parade. And so you can see where sometimes feelings get hurt, and in a situation like that, sometimes everything just dismisses. And And you got several people that are upset except for the choleric, and he's going, I don't understand what the fuss is about. Why is everybody so mad? Just doesn't get it because he or she's not trying to upset anybody. They just didn't see that. And so that can be something to look out for. What we left off was going to talk about the aggressiveness of a choleric. I keep feeling like I'm hearing a overmodulation or something. I'm going to move that down. Maybe I'm just talking too loud. Sometimes the choleric can be aggressive. Quite often they can be aggressive. This goes with leadership ability. They can sometimes be pushy and demanding, and these are things that a phlegmatic will often hate in leadership. They don't respond well to that, phlegmatics that is. You push and prod a phlegmatic, they tend to draw back, whereas other personalities you push and prod and it gets them going. But cholerics are leaders, and sometimes as a leader you got to get out front, right? You got to lead the way, and so they are aggressive to jump in and lead where others may be more hesitant to step in. But sometimes that aggressiveness can get carried away. And again, we've talked about this with all of the personality types. Strengths carried to extremes become weaknesses, right? Sometimes the blunt speech of a choleric will create a wall between him and someone like a melancholy. Melancholy feelings and thinking and sometimes overthinking, it's a part of everyday life. And the choleric may say something that's just on his mind, he says it, and he doesn't think twice about it. And the melancholy may dwell on it for days or weeks or months. And so sometimes that blunt speech can create a wall. And even sanguines, as easy to get along with as they are, they can sometimes get their feelings hurt, be offended because they don't feel like their feelings are being considered. And so that aggressiveness can sometimes create difficulty. Here's an example. A choleric type might push, drive, sometimes yell to get people to do what they believe is the way to grow the Lord's church, maybe even the local congregation. Have you ever seen this sometimes with preachers? They're choleric preachers. And sometimes they get fired up and they're very passionate and sometimes even almost to the point, if not outright, just angry in the pulpit. And we need to be doing this, and we need to be doing this, and they're really just hammering the facts of what we need to do to help the local congregation to grow. And here's the thing. More often than not, if we step back from the situation, if you're not a choleric personality type, us other personality types, if we step back and we're honest, most often the choleric he's right. More often than not. That's that leadership ability. They're born leaders. And so if they've got a way they're going to lead and get things done, we would do well to listen. But on the flip side of that coin, the abuse can take a toll, right? And any personality type, even the most easygoing, sanguine, or phlegmatic, you push too hard, and what's the old saying? Even the tamest of animals, you back them into a corner, and at some point they fight their way out, right? Or at least try to. So the abuse sometimes can take a toll if a choleric is going beyond leadership and getting so aggressive that it's just pushing, driving, yelling, prodding, and so on. But here's the thing that we've got to understand if we're not a choleric. The choleric is so determined to be successful. That is in their nature. They've got to overcome those obstacles. And there's no personal problem. What will happen with a melancholy or sometimes even a phlegmatic, it can even happen with sanguines, is we start thinking, why is she so mean to me? Why does she not like me? Why does he not like me? It ain't a problem with you personally. I can promise you that. Well, in most cases, especially when you're dealing with Christian people who are striving, imperfect people, but people who are striving to follow God. It's not a problem with you personally. But sometimes we get to feeling that way. And the problem is, of course, most people just don't like to be pushed. And that aggressiveness sometimes comes back to bite the choleric. You see this with Paul. Paul's our textbook choleric, right? And in Acts 15, he's going to take this trip with Barnabas. Barnabas wants to bring who? John Mark. Paul says, no, you're not. He left the work earlier, and he's not coming with us. We don't know why John Mark left, but he did, and it upset Paul. So whatever it was, Paul didn't approve of it. And he said, no, he's not coming on this trip with us. And Barnabas said, well, sure, of course he's coming with us. And Paul says, no. And I sort of wonder how this conversation went down, because the Bible, all it tells us is there was a sharp contention. But I sort of wonder if maybe Barnabas looked at Paul at some point and said, look, or at least thought, who died and put you in charge? Now, of course, Paul was an apostle, so he had some authority. I don't know that he would have had authority in this particular matter necessarily, but, maybe that's what Barnabas is thinking. I don't know. Again, that's one of those things the Bible just doesn't tell us, but sometimes people don't like to be pushed. And so Barnabas, instead of yielding and saying, okay, fine, we won't take John Mark, what they end up doing is they end up going their separate ways. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But what we have to remember, if we have a strong choleric personality, especially when it comes to Christians, is that Christians are not paid to work for someone. We work for the Lord. And sometimes as cholerics, we'll get so frustrated because you're trying and you know, and chances are you're right, that this is the best way to accomplish that. We could grow the church if more people would do this, if the people would come and be here for Bible classes and be here on Wednesday nights and take part in our evangelism campaigns and things like this. Man, the church would grow and more people would go to heaven. And is all that right? Yes. But if I get too aggressive and I push and I prod and I scream and I yell and get red-faced and just angry, what am I going to end up doing? I'm just going to push them away, right? So that aggressiveness can be carried to an extreme. Some other things that sometimes you'll see with a choleric personality, sometimes they can be bossy. That goes with the aggressiveness. Unsympathetic. Again, bear in mind, the choleric is looking at a goal, and they don't always see what's in between them and that goal. It's not that they're unsympathetic. They may come across that way and pass you to that goal. They're not trying to ignore you. They're not trying to disregard your feelings. They're focused on that goal. They can be resistant because many times they know this is the better way. Trust me, I'll lead you in the right way. And so you may be saying, no, come over here, and they're resistant. They can be very frank, right? If you know strong cholerics or you are, don't get upset. I'm not trying to be rude, but sometimes they can be very frank. And the personality, some of them we want to work on and try to minimize the difficult aspects of a personality. Impatient, unaffectionate. They can be nervy. They're always focused on that goal, and that is just constantly driven. And so sometimes there can be kind of a nervy type personality. Workaholics many times are cholerics. In fact, I had a pretty frank discussion with Hayner about that because last year he was still in a different location, but he worked himself sick, literally, because he was not getting out, getting any exercise, fresh air. He was just work, and he got sick, physically ill, and he had a real hard time getting well. And I told him, I said, Hayner, I'm no doctor, but I think that probably was something to do with the fact that you just wouldn't slow down. And and he says, yeah, in hindsight. And so one of the things we encouraged him to do before we left, was, hey, take a day off once a week. Go out and do some exercise, walk, get some fresh air, something, so you don't burn yourself out. That workaholic goes a lot of times with the choleric personality. They can be tactless sometimes domineering. That goes with the aggressiveness, stubborn, rash, intolerant, manipulative, short-tempered. They're not trying to be manipulative. They're just, again, they're trying to work around to their way, which 9 times out of 10 is the best way, the right way. But these are some difficulties that we can face with the choleric personality. All right, let's go from there to, if I can get my thing to work here. Talk about melancholies. What can make a melancholy personality difficult? Well, if you remember from talking about melancholy personalities, they are by nature many times negative thinkers. And that can really wear on, especially like a sanguine. You know, the sanguine can drive the melancholy crazy because they speak without thinking. The melancholy can drive the sanguine crazy because you go, why you got to be so negative all the time? You know, if you're a sanguine, I mean, if you're a melancholy personality, maybe you've had somebody say that to you. Why you got to be negative all the time? Of course, if you're a melancholy, what's your response? I'm not negative. I'm realistic. That's what they say every time. And in some ways, that's true. But here's the deal. Melancholies are the geniuses. And so they are going to logically calculate everything to the point where it will sometimes drive you insane if you're not that personality. And you'll be, you're overthinking this, and you're thinking about this too much, and oh no, I'm not. We need to have a plan for every possible. That's how the melancholy thinks, and that's good, and that's needed. They're going to solve problems, the melancholies, and they're going to forecast future problems that are avoidable many times if we listen to them. But as we talked about earlier, sometimes they don't leave room for faith. That negative thinking can rule out faith. Because again, logically, Israel doesn't stand a chance against the city of Jericho. Logically, Gideon doesn't stand a chance with 300 men against an innumerable Midianite host. But by faith, they understood God is fighting for us. And they won those battles. So, sanguines will sometimes become frustrated when they're good ideas. Here's a sanguine. They know they got a good idea, but it's shot down by a well-meaning melancholy who says, well, that's just not in the budget. And you ever had that come up? Sometimes it's just not in the budget. Whereas the flip side of that sometimes that's, if you're talking about a $100,000, $200,000 project, and it's not in the budget, you better stay away from that. You better listen to the melancholy there because they're being smart. I heard of a situation one time where a congregation went about $900,000 into debt to remodel a building that didn't even belong to them. They needed a melancholy to say, whoa, stop. That's not in the budget. But sometimes it's something like, I've also seen a congregation, worked with a congregation, had a preacher student come through. Can you help me go to a preacher training school? I'd known this young man since he was just a boy, going to camp with him at Backwoods Christian Camp in Lineville. Recommended him, highly recommended that we support him. Oh, well, that's not in the budget, and we're just not a very big congregation. I said, hey, most of the people that supported me when I was in preaching school, if I got $100 a month, I was thrilled. I had one or two congregations that did maybe $300, $400 a month. I had several congregations and some individuals that did $25, $50, $75, $100 a month. Let's write the young man a check, $2,400. Write it to the preaching school, and tell him this is 2 years, $100 a month. This was a congregation that had $250,000 in the bank, but it's not in the budget. Never did support that young man to preach. Now, thank God he got the money he needed and he got his education to preach, but you see the difference? Oh, it's not in the budget. Where's the faith? Why not challenge the congregation? When I was going to preaching school, it wasn't in my home congregation's budget either. But you know what they did? They said, one Sunday night, we're going to have you get up and we want you to preach. And, if you want to call it that, it was pretty pitiful as I recall. But they said, we're going to get you to get up and speak. How about that? And then one of the elders got up afterward. And they said, look, our budget is set. It's the middle of the year. We're going to plan to put Chad in the budget for next year. But what we want to do is we don't want any of the works that we're supporting to suffer. So please don't take away from your regular contribution. But if you can support Chad, let the elders know. We're going to oversee those funds. I got almost all my support from my home congregation. And it wasn't in the budget. So sometimes well-meaning melancholies leave out faith with things like it's not in the budget or the infamous, we've never done it that way before. Well, had Israel ever taken a city like that before Joshua chapter 6 with Jericho? Well, of course not. So again, reason is needed, but we also got to have faith in things that are unseen. That's what faith is, the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. So again, they don't mean to be negative, the melancholies. They just feel like they're being realistic. So sometimes negative thinking can cause difficulty. Also, sometimes you can have difficulty with melancholies because they'll get their feelings hurt. This is very hard for a choleric to understand. because the choleric may get mad and get over it, right? Or maybe not even necessarily get upset. Somebody says, you walk up to a choleric and say, I don't really like that outfit. And choleric says, okay. You say that to a melancholy, and you may have just lost a friend. It could be, you may not even say that. You may say, well, I'll give you an example here in just a moment. Feelings are an everyday part of the melancholy's life. And that's not a bad thing, and especially when you're dealing with other people. You need to consider feelings. In fact, that's one of the weaknesses of the choleric. Sometimes they don't consider others' feelings. But these intense thinking melancholies sometimes overanalyze things. They sometimes overanalyze the comments or actions of other people. Here's an example. Tracy, I think, mentioned this one in the book. Maybe it's a fellowship meal, and somebody comes up to you and they say, that dish you brought, it looks so beautiful sitting on the table. And you know what the melancholy might start to think? Does anybody know where this is going? Maybe a melancholy is going to speak up. Somebody's a melancholy here because somebody said it. What, did she say that because it didn't taste good? And so what she's trying to say is, that was terrible, but it looked good. That's what they start thinking sometimes, right? And by Sunday evening, she's not talking to the person because of that rude comment she made to me. I can't believe the audacity. When it was just somebody trying to say something nice, right? That might happen. Overly sensitive melancholies can put themselves, and let me tell you something, those around them, their spouses, through a lot of grief and pain sometimes, because they're often over-analyzing, and they get their feelings hurt when sometimes it's just nothing. And especially, this is where these are sometimes you'll see certain personalities that are at polar opposite extremes. And this is it for a choleric and a melancholy. A choleric, you could just about walk up and say, man, I think you look terrible today. And he might say, well, right back at you, buddy, and move on, and that's it. But, we used to say when I was in high school, boys get mad and they get into a fight and it's over. They're best friends. Girls get mad and what? It's a feud for years, right? Sometimes that's the difference between men and women, but sometimes it's a personality thing. Melancholies can often get their feelings hurt more quickly. And so here are a few other things that you'll see sometimes. Melancholies many times tend to be introverted. We've already talked about that, bashful. Sensitive feelings, when somebody says something, they hold on to that. They latch on to it many times for way too long. Sometimes we just need to let it go. They can be resentful. That goes with unforgiving, fussy, insecure, unpopular, hard to please. They can be pessimistic. That's the negative thinking. Alienated, negative attitude, withdrawn, too sensitive. That's with the feelings. They can be depressed because of that negative thinking. They can be introverted, moody, skeptical, a loner type. Many times they're suspicious. That's that, well, why did you make that comment? What did she really mean by that? What was he really trying to say? They can be revengeful, and they can sometimes be critical. All right, let's go on to a phlegmatic. What makes a phlegmatic difficult? Well, many times they just don't want to be involved. Sometimes they just rather not be involved. It's not that they don't care about the church and its growth. They just see involvement as a possible controversy. Tracy mentions a guy who he passed on an opportunity to lead a mission trip because he didn't want to deal with potential arguments and problems that would be involved with that, potential controversy. So what he wanted to do was just to go as a regular old helper. I just want to go as a regular participant on the mission trip. I don't want to lead this big group because he saw involvement as a possible controversy. For a choleric leader, they don't get this. The choleric just doesn't get it. Of course, the phlegmatic's probably thinking they don't get why the choleric's jumping in to lead on everything and so aggressive. But that's where the difficulty sometimes comes in. And where we can understand each other better, we understand our temperament, our personality. The choleric, though, he doesn't necessarily like conflict, but he realizes sometimes you got obstacles between you and your goal. And what are you going to do? Are you going to just stop, turn around, and go back? Or are you going to take on the obstacle? This is where phlegmatics and cholerics need to learn from each other. The phlegmatic needs to learn, don't just stop and say, well, I'm just going to stop here, or I'm going to turn and go back the other way. You got to take on the obstacle, and you got to conquer it. But the choleric can also learn that sometimes you don't just bowl over an obstacle. There may be, as the old saying goes, more than one way to skin a cat. So we can learn from each other. The phlegmatic may come across to the choleric who's made a lot of sacrifices for the Lord's cause, as if the choleric may be thinking, well, he doesn't care about the church. He doesn't care about glorifying God. Hey, he just wants to sit and do nothing. And that may not necessarily be the case. Just there's this concern over controversy. So that sometimes happens with phlegmatics. They're also not overly excited. They're not incapable of enthusiasm. They just don't always show it as well as others, right? My dad is a very strong phlegmatic, and sometimes we'd give him a present, and he would open it up, and it'd be something that he'd said for months. Oh, I really want that. That'd be if you're looking for a Christmas gift idea, here it is. And so we'd get it for him, and he'd open it up, and he'd go, huh, that's nice. And my sister and I would be like, seriously? I mean, especially, I've got, strong phlegmatic side, but I'm also got a lot of strong sanguine in me. And I'm thinking, I mean, come on. You talked about how you wanted this, and we get it for you, and you go, huh, that's nice. And my dad used to say, well, what do you want me to do? Backflips across the room? That was his response to that every time. And now we've come full circle. I say that to my kids sometimes. The circle goes on, But he wasn't that he didn't like the gift. It wasn't that he wasn't excited about it. He just didn't show it. And sometimes, this is one of those with my sanguine and my phlegmatic side where I sometimes feel like I have bipolar disease or something because there are times when something will happen and I'm just fired up about it and I get so excited and I'm just raring to go. And then there are other times when my wife or my kids may say, hello, are you there? You said you wanted this. You were supposed to be excited about it. It's a big deal. It costs a lot of money. Can you give us something here? And that's usually when I respond, what do you want me to do? Backflips across the room. But the phlegmatic, they're just not going to show the enthusiasm the same. They're probably the most mellow and least excitable temperament. And I know I've talked to somebody else here, I can't remember who it was, that is like me and has a lot of phlegmatic and a lot of sanguine. And you sometimes feel like two different personalities because there are times when the sanguine is dominating and I love to be around people and I just can't get enough. And then there are times when I guess my phlegmatic side is coming out more because I could be content just to go away from everybody and just not talk to anybody, which that's more the phlegmatic introverted side. But they're the most mellow, least excitable temperament, which can disappoint the sanguine because the sanguine wants them all in on the big plans, right? I mean, we got this plan. We're going to grow the church, and brother phlegmatic's sitting over here going, okay, sounds good. And the sanguine is going, seriously? And here's a good example. The sanguine is talking to a phlegmatic and saying, listen, Sunday we had all these visitors. This guy responded. He was baptized into Christ. That study's been going on for a long time. The elders and the preacher have been studying with him. And listen, Brother so-and-so was restored. And we got this program going. And you should have seen, we had this involvement meeting, and all these people showed up. And it was great. And the phlegmatic may just kind of, more or less say, man, that's good. That's exciting. And the sanguine is going, the sanguine, you want to shake them and say, are you listening? That's exciting. You don't sound very excited. Well, I'm excited. Yeah, you look real excited, buddy. That's what the sanguine wants to say, right? It's just that they don't show it the same way. And so just because a person's not doing backflips across the room, don't assume that they're not excited. But that's a difficulty sometimes between a sanguine and a phlegmatic. Sometimes even in our own minds, if you're like me. Understanding the phlegmatic temperament helps understand that he's not uninterested. He just doesn't show interest as much. Here's some other problems with the phlegmatics you'll sometimes see. Sometimes they're just kind of blank. You might say out to lunch. Unenthusiastic, we talked about that. Reticent, fearful, indecisive. Woo, man, phlegmatics indecisive, aren't they? That happens to us phlegmatics sometimes. Uninvolved, hesitant, plain. They're not real big on fancy stuff. They're plain. They're aimless sometimes, nonchalant. Many times they're worriers. They might be timid. That's that a desire to avoid conflict. Sometimes they're doubtful, indifferent, mumbling. It's hard to get a straight answer. Sometimes you feel like slow, lazy, sluggish, reluctant, sometimes compromising. Compromising is not always a bad thing, but when it's a situation where you need to take a stand, then yeah, that's a bad thing. And so understanding goes a long way. We want to understand what makes each personality type difficult, but we also want to understand our own personality. We want to understand God's expectations of us. And so we've got to seek unity even with difficult brethren. Colossians 3:12 and 13, he says, "Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye." Paul's admonition to the ladies there in Philippians 4:2 and 3 was to settle their personality dispute. He didn't take sides. He said this was clearly a personality issue. When there was a doctrinal matter, Paul didn't hesitate. He said, here's what you need to do. Get this right. But he tells those ladies, settle your dispute. And when we learn to deal with difficult people, it results in great blessings personally, but also for the congregation and the Lord's church as a whole. I realize we are really short on time, but I want to come through these quickly. Dealing with difficult people. Each personality type we're going to focus on the number one need if you want to get along with this personality type. Sanguines, as you see here. You want to get along with a difficult sanguine. If that sanguine is driving you crazy, they need praise. They need praise more than any other temperament. This is not necessarily at least, because they have a big ego. The Bible says in Proverbs 12, verse 25, the last part of that verse, he says, heaviness in the heart of a man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad. It might be a person with a big ego, but don't just assume that. They need praise. That's in their nature. They want people to like them. They want to be the life of the party. At the very least, they want folks to like them. Not false flattery either. In fact, the Bible has a lot to say in Proverbs 28, 23, 29, 5, and other places about flattery. We're talking about genuine recognition. It's understanding that there are a lot of positive things that a sanguine personality knows. Don't just flatter, but find something. In fact, this will do you good to help you learn to look for the good in others. Find something that brother or that sister's doing for the church. And you start praising them, and you'll see a big change. Jesus used this approach. Paul did with Philemon. Jesus used it with 3 of the 7 churches of Asia. When he had something to criticize, now 2 of them, there were no criticism. And 2 of them, there was no good, nothing but criticism. But 3 of them, he started off by saying, here's what you're doing great. And then he got into, here's what you need to work on. Now, if that was Jesus' example, don't you think that's something that is worth imitating? Sanguines need praise. Think about Peter. He's our typical sanguine. We talked about strong, sanguine personality. After the rich young ruler turns and walks away, and Jesus talks about how hard it is for somebody with riches to enter into heaven, Peter says what? We've left everything. Yeah, we've left everything to follow you, Lord. What about us? Jesus doesn't say, you got to be kidding, Peter. That is the most selfish, ego-filled question. Who cares what's in it for you? You just follow me because it's the right thing to do. Jesus didn't say that. You know what he does say? He follows up by saying in verses 28 and 29, there are all these rewards, and in the world to come, eternal life. He understood Peter needed to hear that. Jesus knew people. Of course he should. He created them. And he knew how to get the most out of a sanguine personality. Look at Matthew 16, 17 through 19. Coming right on the heels of Jesus having to rebuke Peter for standing in the way of his very mission here on earth, he turns around and says, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. In Luke 22, 31 and 32, Satan's desired to have you that he might sift you as wheat, but I've prayed for you when you are converted. He doesn't say if you're converted. When you are converted, Peter, I believe in you. When you are converted, strengthen your brethren. What did Peter go on to do? One of the great leaders in the early church. The Lord knew he needed that praise. Sanguines, they need praise and encouragement. They're emotional people. They need to know you care. That's what a sanguine needs to know. They need to know somebody cares about them. You give them the right amount of encouragement, do it in the right ways, you'll be amazed at how well and how easily you get along with a sanguine personality. Let's go right into talking about cholerics. Sanguines need praise. Cholerics need power. They're born leaders. We've talked about this. They need to be in control. Again, it makes sense. They are most often the most dependable, the most decisive, the most determined of all the personalities. Making them feel in control is the key to getting along with them. Now, this is not just, again, flattery or placating them. It's also not letting them run over you. In fact, a choleric's going to respect you more if you stand up to them and not just let them run roughshod over you. They don't want somebody just to let them run over them. Again, they're very goal, task-oriented people. Get them to understand that you're trying to help them accomplish the mission. You're not trying to undermine the mission or abort it. You're trying to help them accomplish it. And so when a difficulty arises, make sure you're on the same page. Look, I like your mission here. I'm on board with that. We're going to accomplish that. But what if we went about it this way? You start talking about it that way, and you're not trying to seize control or abort the mission or take it over, and the choleric will start listening to you. They want their work to succeed, and if you can help them understand why and how that your difference of opinion helps with that, they're going to listen. They're not unreasonable people. They're just very goal-oriented, task-oriented people. They're going to listen and change, and you know what? They'll respect you in the process of doing so. Think about Barnabas and Paul. Oh, all the examples in Acts 9. Barnabas and Paul go way back. Barnabas took Paul to the disciples early after his conversion. Yes, he is a Christian. He's not trying to trick people. But later on they had this disagreement, right? Barnabas knew how to handle Paul. He didn't threaten his control. He didn't cause a big conflict. He helped carry out the work of evangelism, just in a different direction. You know what, Paul? How about this? I'll take John Mark. You take somebody else, and now one team becomes two. That's a smart man dealing with a strong choleric personality. Getting along with cholerics isn't always easy, but it's possible. It's worth the effort. Cholerics are going to stand up for you when many times nobody else will. And they've often got clout and power to help you as well. Melancholies, they need structure in their lives. If you want to get along with a melancholy, you got to give attention to detail. They may not be as vocal about it as the sanguine as a sanguine or a choleric, but they've got to have structure in almost everything. Tracy said it was probably a melancholy who came up with the schedule of worship that you see in most bulletins or handouts. Here's an example. Somebody speaking to the elders and says, we need to evangelize the community. I want to announce that, I want you to make an announcement. Anybody interested, meet at the building this Saturday. But a melancholy elder or elders suddenly is filled with questions. Well, what time? What time are you going to begin? What time are you going to end? Are you going to walk? Are you going to drive? Are you going to ride bicycles? What about people that don't have a bicycle? Are you going to provide lunch for the people that are working? All these questions, on and on and on. And what happens with the sanguine who came up with the idea starts thinking the elders don't care about evangelism. They don't care about soul winning. That's not the case at all. They just want to figure out the best way to accomplish it. Look at Exodus 18 sometime and look at the potential dispute between Moses and Jethro. Jethro, he sees Moses is overworked and he needs to tell him, but he don't want to cause strife. So he appeals to Moses' melancholy temperament and he lays out this plan, a very detailed plan, and the end result is Moses followed it. And he gave Moses order in his life and it avoided strife. Let me go through this one very quickly. I know it's my last Wednesday and some people are not going to be in here next week, so y'all bear with me. Phlegmatics' number one need is to get along with others. And so if you're dealing with a difficult phlegmatic, they need peace. And when this is threatened, they can withdraw, they can distance themselves. Communication becomes impossible. They're not going to be involved with the work. And they're going to be contemplating leaving the congregation. So how do you deal with a personality whose feelings are hurt so easily? Sometimes they're going to do things that are wrong out of ignorance, and in matters of opinion, just let it go. But there are other times when something has to be said. You got to reassure them. You got to praise them. Sarcasm, rudeness isn't going to work on a phlegmatic. They're going to just turtle. They're going to withdraw. They respond well to compromise, diplomacy, sincerity. Offer them help. Clarify the problem strengthen the relationship, build them up. A choleric, you could go to him and you can say, here's the problem, man, fix it. And you know what he's going to do? He's going to fix it. You've presented him a task, a goal, an obstacle. Phlegmatics won't respond well to that. They won't respond well to somebody riding their case. And so you got to take a little bit different approach. And you see this with Paul's approach to Timothy. And again, I'll always share my PowerPoints if you want to do that. I know we're out of time. This is no doubt why Paul and Timothy had such a relationship. Look at how he handled Barnabas versus how he handled Timothy. Very different because they were different personality types. Closing out here, sometimes the difficult people in our lives are the ones who themselves find us to be the difficult person in their lives, right? Isn't that the case? Sometimes the ones we find annoying are just people that they're not like us. And it's hard to see myself as the problem because my personality seems so right to me. And that's why we need to look in the mirror itself first to see if I'm the one causing problems. With the proper patience and understanding, we can get along with difficult people. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it is possible. And if we can avoid discord and division as we close out, is that worth a little bit of effort? Absolutely. That's worth a whole lot of effort, isn't it? Thank you so much. I hate to end this study because I've enjoyed it so much, and I hope it's been a benefit to you as well. Lord willing, we'll pick up with a new study next week. Thank you very much.